The heat shimmers over the cracked highway, the scent of dust and gasoline lingering in the dry air. A neon sign flickers over a roadside diner, its glow casting long, uncertain shadows as a jukebox hums a melody. The town itself seems frozen in time, pastel-colored motors lined up in neat rows, a one-pump gas station, a perfect little world dropped in the middle of nowhere. But there's something off, not quite wrong, but not quite real either. This is Asteroid City, a place that exists not in history, but in memory, or perhaps in the version of memory we've stitched together from old postcards, movie reels and half-remembered stories from our grandparents. It feels like the 1950s that America has spent decades perfecting in its collective imagination. A golden era of optimism, suburban comforts, and scientific wonder. But look closer, and you see the seams. The neatness is too neat, the colors are too bright, and the people move and speak as if they already know their place in the scene. Wes Anderson built this town, and he lets us in on the secret from the start. This isn't just a story, it's a story about telling stories. A carefully crafted play wrapped in the illusion of history. The curtain lifts before we even realize it was there. A black and white broadcast flickers to life. A deep voice narrator sets the stage, and we are told plainly that this is not real, it is a play. A story being performed within the frame of a vintage television special, complete with grainy film stock and a kind of mid-century earnestness that suggests everything is exactly as it should be. But the longer we watch, the more the sense of certainty dissolves. Because Wes Anderson isn't interested in playing things straight, he wants us to see the strings. It's 1955 and the town is about to play host to a peculiar gathering, the Junior Stargaze Convention, an event designed to celebrate the brightest young minds in science. Children arrive with their latest inventions, parents linger at the edges of their achievements, and the town for a brief moment becomes the center of something larger than itself. Among the visitors is Augie Steenbeck, a war photographer who, as it turns out, has been concealing devastating news from his children. His wife has died, and he hasn't yet found the words to tell them. He carries her ashes in a Tupperware container, and unsettling a casual vessel for something so profound. His son, Woodrow, is one of the junior stargazers, a brilliant but reserved boy who, like his father, struggles to articulate the weight of what he feels. They are joined by a collection of characters, each of them caught between past and future, between who they are and who they think they ought to be. There's Mitch Campbell, a Hollywood actress rehearsing lines even when no one is watching. Dr. Hickenlooper, a scientist guiding the young geniuses with the detached authority of someone who has seen far too much. And a group of military officers who hover at the edges, making sure everything stays under control. Every element of Asteroid City reminds us of its artificiality. The sets are meticulous, the performance is mannered, the dialogue rehearsed in a way that makes every pause and hesitation feel preordained. Characters act as if they were aware of their own staging, not just within the world of the play, but within the play's place in history. The actors, both those within the story and those portraying the actors within the television special, move through a world that feels uncanny, not because it's inaccurate, but because it's too precise, too polished, too curated to be anything but a construction. Long before Asteroid City pulled back the curtain on its own artificiality, another play invited the audience to do the same. Thornton Wilder's Our Town premiered in 1938, stripping away the distractions of elaborate sets and period costumes to reveal something deeper, something truer than realism could ever capture. It was a play about the quiet, unremarkable rhythms of everyday life in Grover's Corners, a fictional New England town where nothing extraordinary seemed to happen. A milkman made his deliveries, children hurried off to school, sweethearts fell in love, married, and built lives that felt ordinary, until suddenly they weren't. Wilder's most daring choice was his stage manager, a narrator who moved freely between storyteller and participant, addressing the audience directly, controlling time, shifting between past and future, with the ease of someone flipping through a well-worn book. There were no walls, no illusions of realism, just actors on a bare stage, performing the ritual of a small-town existence, while the audience was made constantly aware that it was all a performance. And yet, through that stark theatricality, Our Town became something more than just a portrait of small-town life. It became a meditation on time itself, how it slips away unnoticed, how we live so completely inside the ordinary that we fail to see its quiet beauty until it's gone. Anderson borrows this approach in Asteroid City, though his tools are different. Where Wilder used minimalism to expose the mechanics of storytelling, Anderson uses excess. He doesn't strip away, he embellishes, but the effect is the same. The audience is kept at a distance, made aware of the artifice, reminded that everything they are watching has been carefully arranged to feel like a memory, not a lived experience. And yet, just as in our town that self-awareness doesn't dilute the emotion, it sharpens it. And just as Wilder's stage manager asks his audience to reflect on the way time slips through our fingers, Anderson's carefully choreographed world asks us to consider the nature of nostalgia itself. The nostalgia wears a costume. It steps onto the stage dressed in the colors we remember, speaking the voices we think we've lost. It knows its lines by heart, rehearsed and polished over years of repetition. It doesn't have to be true. It only has to feel true. And that is a trick Wes Anderson plays in Asteroid City. The layers of performance are not just flourishes. They're the point. Every frame, every perfectly symmetrical shot, every deliberately scripted line is a reminder that what we call memory is in fact theater. Anderson builds a world that looks like the past, but with suggestion. The play within a documentary structure makes sure we never forget that. Just when we might settle into the illusion, the film pulls back, reveals the stage door, an off-screen conversation, a reminder that this world is being created before our eyes. And that is precisely how nostalgia works. We tell ourselves a version of the past, and it will become something altogether different from what it once was. It isn't deception, not exactly, it's storytelling. The kind that makes us feel safe, the kind that makes us believe there was a time when things made sense, when people spoke with certainty, when life was scripted in a way we could understand. It is more comforting to remember the laughter of children on bicycles than the voice of those who were silenced, more appealing to recall mall shops and sock hops than the battles fought in the streets for civil rights. Anderson doesn't just acknowledge his longing, he exposes it. He invites us to step inside a path that never was, to admire its perfection, and then, ever so gently, to remind us that the perfection was never the point. Progress hummed through the air like the static buzz of a television warming up. The war was over, the boys had come home. America was booming, new homes, new highways, new technologies, promising a future that gleamed like the chrome trim on a Cadillac. It was the age of Eisenhower, of suburban sprawl, of neatly manicured lawns and the quiet hum of consumer confidence. The American dream, once a distant promise, was now mass-produced and available for purchase in the Sears catalog. And yet, just beyond the glow of neon diners and drive-in theaters, something darker lurked. The same science that gave the world color television and space-age optimism had also cracked open the atom. The bombs that ended the war had not vanished into history, that only multiplied. Their destructive power growing in secret test sites scattered across the American desert. The United States and the Soviet Union sat in uneasy silence, locked in a competition that had no finish line, no winner, only the promise of annihilation if one side dared to blink. School children learned to duck and cover beneath wooden desks that wouldn't stand a chance against the fire and fury of an atomic blast. Towns near nuclear testing sites so their skies light up with artificial suns. And yet the advertisements still painted a picture of paradise. A world of Norman Rockwell paintings, where children grin with gap-toothed innocence, and fathers carve Thanksgiving turkeys beneath the warm glow of tradition. Television screens filled with cheerful jingles. Housewives in aprons marveling at the latest kitchen appliances. Men in grey flannel suits smiling as they stepped onto commuter trains, bound for jobs that promised security and stability. The contradiction wasn't hidden, it was everywhere, stitched into the very fabric of daily life. Injustice thrived, segregation was a law of the land. Women encouraged to embrace suburban domesticity were quietly being forced out of the workforce. The fear of conformity wasn't just a subject of dystopian fiction, it was a daily reality, reinforced by social expectations and the looming spectre of McCarthy-era paranoia. The same government that reassured its citizens of safety was stockpiling warheads. The future was speeding towards them, sleek and streamlined like a jet plane, but no one could be sure if it was taking them to utopia or oblivion. Anderson takes this unease and distills it into Asteroid City, crafting a world where innocence and anxiety collide with almost surgical precision. The children, brilliant, precocious, unshaken, win science competitions, build gadgets beyond their years, and dream of a universe just waiting to be explored. The adults, wary and uncertain, carry the weight of history on their shoulders. They have seen what progress can do, what it can take away. They know that for every discovery, there's a cost. The wonder of the future belongs to the young, The reckoning belongs to those who remember what came before. The film captures this tension not just in dialogue, but in every frame, in every carefully composed shot. There's a town, isolated and exposed, feels both limitless and claustrophobic. The pastel colors and mid-century perfection, a deliberate mirage, a world that looks safe and inviting but trembles at the edges. It happens suddenly, as these things often do. One moment the world is as it was. Then during the award ceremony of this junior stargazer convention, celebrating those young genius minds, a shadow passes overhead, and nothing is the same. An alien descends in silence. Neither menacing nor particularly majestic. A figure of strange simplicity. Its arrival is witnessed, recorded, remembered. The alien doesn't need to speak, it doesn't need to threaten or explain itself. Its very presence is enough. In the 1950s, the sight of something unfamiliar in the sky carried weight. It wasn't just an oddity, it was a warning. A flicker of light on the horizon could be a weather balloon, a Soviet aircraft. Americans had been trained to expect invasion, to fear the unknown, to believe that danger would arrive suddenly, from above. Science fiction thrived on these anxieties, filling drive-in screens with silver saucers and men in rubber suits, each one a stand-in for something more terrestrial, a foreign enemy, a creepy ideology, a shift in the world order that no one was quite prepared to name. But for all its paranoia, there was something else lurking beneath, something quieter, something sadder. The alien was always other, but not always hostile. In the day the Earth stood still, an extraterrestrial visitor warns humanity of its self-destructive path, not as a conqueror but as a reluctant observer. It came from outer space, a ship crashes in the desert, its passengers misunderstood and hunted by fearful humans who assumed the worst. In Asteroid City, the alien is both an event and an idea. It appears, lingers just long enough to be acknowledged, and then vanishes, leaving only questions in its wake. The town is thrown into lockdown, quarantined under government orders, as if the simple act of being in the presence of something beyond comprehensions is enough to render a place unsafe. But what exactly has changed? The people of Asteroid City were already adrift, already uncertain about the place in the universe. The alien does not cause the existential crisis so much as amplify what was already there. It is, after all, not the first outsider to arrive in town. The desert is full of them. The children, too brilliant for their own good. The war photographer, carrying lost like a ghost he refuses to acknowledge. The actress playing a role, even when the camera is unrolling. The scientist, searching for certainty in an area that has none to offer. Each of them is an alien in their own right, orbiting one another without ever fully making contact. There is a kind of a quiet tragedy in that. The realization that no one truly belongs in the world they inhabit, not because they are unwelcome, but because they are unsure of the purpose within it. Wes Anderson's worlds are pristine, every frame balanced with an almost obsessive precision. The pastel colors soften reality. The deliberate blocking ensures no movement is out of place. His characters exist within dioramas, their lives playing out like scenes in a dollhouse. And because of this, his films are often been accused of emotional detachment. The performances are restrained, the dialogue delivered in a measured cadence, as if each line has been carefully considered before being spoken. There is a remove, a distance between the audience and the people on screen. But that distance is not an accident. Asteroid City is a film about grief, but it does not announce itself as such. Its characters are grieving, some for lost loved ones, some for lost time, some for a version of themselves they can no longer return to. And yet, they do not wail, do not break down in dramatic displays of sorrow. Instead, their emotions are contained, compressed into measured words and carefully chosen gestures. The weight of their feelings is not absent, it is simply locked beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to slip through the cracks. Anderson's aesthetic does not mute emotion, it reflects how we process it. When we recall the past, we rarely remember the rawness of pain. Instead, we remember the shape of it, the way it sat in a room, the way the light looked through a window in the moment we realized someone was gone. Grief does not always announce itself in grand gestures. Sometimes it is found in the way a character lingers at the telephone, hesitates before stepping onto stage, or looks up at the stars and wonders what, if anything, is looking back. In Asteroid City, Anderson does what nostalgia itself does. He arranges the past into something beautiful, something that feels controlled, something that offers the illusion of order. It is not that his characters do not feel, it is that they, like us, struggle to translate those feelings into something they can understand. When the curtain falls on Anderson's constructed universe, we are left unsettled, uncertain of what we were supposed to feel. It was all a performance, and yet the emotions beneath it were real. The grief, the loneliness, the yearning for connection, but they were contained, turned into something more palatable. And that perhaps is what nostalgia does best. It doesn't erase history, but it edits it, rewrites it into something that fits the narrative we want to believe. But that's also where the danger lies. Nostalgia isn't just a feeling, it's a tool. When wielded carefully, it can be a source of comfort, a reminder of where we came from, a way to connect with something lost. But in the wrong hands, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes propaganda, a way to erase the inconvenient truths of history, to sell a past that never really was. It tells us that things used to be better, simpler, purer, without acknowledging who was excluded from the version of the past, who was left outside the frame.